Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My name is Beth Winkelstein. I'm the Deputy Provost here, and I'm so thrilled to welcome all of you to this exciting and long in the making event. In September, Penn announced the creation of the Office of Religious and Ethnic Interests. That office opened its doors in December, but began partnering with our schools, campus partners, campus offices, and groups, and learning about our community right away. One of their efforts has been focused on bringing thoughtful leaders to campus to teach about dialogue, leadership, and combating discrimination and hate on our campus. Today's program, The Role of Business Leaders in Addressing Hate and Bias, is not only emblematic of those goals, but a fabulous example of doing something that is very Penn. We're fortunate today to host two CEOs who have been leaders in addressing hate and bias in our country. They model the leadership, values, and skills that we embrace and respect at Penn. We are delighted to hear about their efforts, but before I introduce them, I want to thank a few folks. I mentioned already the Office of Religious and Ethnic Interests. Majid Alsaya is here. I think Steve Ginsberg, his co-director, will be joining us shortly. I want to thank the rest of their team who have all been doing amazing work since September. In addition to that office, we should also thank Perry Worldhouse for hosting us, and the Office of Social Equity and Community, as well as the School of Arts and Sciences, and the Office of the Provost, for which I sit, but I'm thanking them because someone else actually sponsored it, not me. I am thrilled to welcome today two CEOs who have worked together for 9 years with Muslim and Jewish leaders to address matters concerning both of those communities. Their primary focus has been combating the rise of bias and hate crimes in our country. Stanley Bergman, who I'm blocking, oh, you moved your chair, good for you, is the chairman and CEO of Henry Schein Incorporated, a Fortune 500 company and the world's largest provider of products and services to dental practitioners and others across the globe. His company has more than 25,000 employees in 33 countries and has earned a top score on the Human Rights Campaign Foundation's Corporate Equality Index. Stanley is a past president of the American Jewish Committee and co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Council. He has received many awards, including the 2017 CEO of the Year Award by Chief Executive Magazine. Stanley serves as a board member or advisor of numerous institutions, including our own School of Dental Medicine. I also want to acknowledge Marion Bergman, Stanley's wife, who is here with us today as well. They and their family are active supporters of organizations fostering the arts, higher education, and sustainable entrepreneurial economic development initiatives around the world. Our other guest is Farooq Kathwari, who has been the chairman and CEO of Ethan Allen Interiors since 1988. He serves several nonprofit organizations, including as a member of the Board of Overseers of the International Rescue Committee, the Advisory Board of the Center of Strategic and International Studies, and the Council on Foreign Relations. And he's also a member of the International Advisory Council of the United States Institute of Peace. Farooq served on the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders from 2010 to 2014, and was a member of the bipartisan, congressionally mandated U.S. Institute of Peace Task Force on Extremism in Fragile States. Stanley and Farooq are immigrants, and both were awarded the 2018 Ellis Island Medal of Honor for their contributions to this country. Lastly, we are delighted to have Deborah Amos to moderate this event. She is the Ferris Professor of Journalism in Residence at Princeton University and spent much of her award-winning career at National Public Radio. She covered many top stories, including the Syrian and Iraqi refugee crises, the economy in the Middle East, and the Arab youth surge. Deborah is the recipient of several journalism awards, including a Courage in Journalism Award, the George Foster Peabody Award, an Edward R. Murrow Lifetime Achievement Award, and an Emmy. Before I turn it over to Deborah, the folks here at Perry World House have asked that I talk to you about how you can ask questions. At your seat, you should have an index card and a pen. Throughout the event, please feel free to write down any questions you have for our panelists, pass them to the aisle where they will be collected. And just before we tell you we're turning to Q&A, they'll be collected so that Deborah can work her way through them. For those of you on Zoom, you can send your question through the chat function and they will be collected and given as well to the moderator. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone, I think you have one, right, over to Deborah. And thank you all for being here. I know it's going to be a delight.
Welcome to spring. This is a surprise. And I can't think of a better time to be talking about interfaith dialogue on a day that the radio is filled with tributes to Pope Francis, who spent so much of his papacy championing interfaith dialogue. So this is a good time to do it. But on this stage, we have two CEOs whose metrics are management, consumer satisfaction. Now, both of you, or not now, but you have been engaged for years now in interfaith dialogue, where the metrics are very different. So I want to ask each one of you to tell us why this moved you enough to move into a dialogue that is hard to measure success, brings you lots of problems and some successes. Let me start with you, Farooq.
Well, first of all, it's a very pleasure to be here and to participate in this very important discussion. We all are impacted by our backgrounds and where we come from. So I came from an area, beautiful area called Kashmir, great mountains, great beauty, but an area of conflict. We saw conflict, we saw issues. So it was part of my life. So, and then to try to help in terms of seeing how we can help resolve those conflicts or make them less was an important part of our life. So it was part of our culture, it was part of our family. So it came very naturally to me. It was not something that I had to learn because I had seen it, lived it. And when this opportunity came, it was very natural.
Stan.
Thank you, Deb. Farooq, it's great to be here with you. It's really wonderful to be on this campus. I've had a long affiliation one way or another with Penn. But Deb, you mentioned the passing of the Pope. And the Pope, there's a little story I will tell you, has been an inspiration to me as an individual. So I've been active in the American Jewish Committee, AJC, for decades. The fellow that ran our Africa Institute was born in Argentina. His mother was Catholic, his father was Jewish. His mother passed away at a very young age. The Pope, who just passed away, Pope Francis, was the local priest in the community where his mother was the member of the church. And he insisted on this young man and his brother, insisted on them having lessons in both the Jewish world and the Catholic world, and encouraged this young man to then choose whichever he wanted. He chose to be Jewish. And when I became president of the AJC, I wanted to, my first wish was to meet the Pope, which I was granted, and we took a delegation, and he spoke nonstop for about a half an hour on interfaith work. And, but my background goes way back. I was born in a place called Port Elizabeth, South Africa, of parents that were refugees from Nazi Germany, left Germany in 1936. My dad, on his desk, we had a little home in Port Elizabeth, had a little quote from a pastor by the name of Martin Niemöller. Martin Niemöller was a pretty conservative priest, probably a little bit right-wing oriented. And what he said was, first, and I'm paraphrasing, first they came for the socialists and I did nothing. Then they came for the union, trade union people. I did nothing. And then they came for the Jews and I did nothing. And then they came for me and it was too late. So that was the home I grew up in. In addition to that, my dad, my parents had a store in an area of Port Elizabeth called South End. South End and a place called District 6, for those that know Cape Town, are places that were totally integrated. And right towards the end of the apartheid regime, they destroyed both District 6 and then Port Elizabeth, South End. This was a community with people from all over the former British Empire, people from the Far East, from what is today Indonesia, from the subcontinent of India, from Hong Kong, etc., Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, everybody got along. And that was where my life took place. That's where I learned the value of different religions, of multiculturalism, and that's where I learned that you've got to listen to people. And then later on in my life, in Port Elizabeth, maybe at the age of 14 or 15, I was involved in a youth movement which brought Jewish young kids to the different houses of worship. I went to mosques, I went to Hindu temples, churches, synagogues, of course, and I had a great understanding of what it meant to work in the world of interfaith. And that's where the journey began, 50, 60 years ago in South Africa.
So it sounds like New Jersey. This is a migrant state. But I wanted to ask, is there a price for people who do this work? Are there things, is there a price to pay for people who put themselves out there, who talk to what others consider others? And do you have to warn or counsel people who work with you that there is a price?
I think the price is a good price. You know, I'm involved with a company that is, Ethan Allen is a very well-known and a respected brand. It's a household name. When I had to get involved with something like this, I had to think it through. What would be the impacts of this with our very diverse group of people that I work with? We have folks working with us. You know, Ethan Allen is 93 years. We're just celebrating our 93rd year. Just get a little background about this diversity. It was started by two Jewish entrepreneurs 93 years back. And one of them his name was Ansel, but his real name, family name was Anselowitz, was impacted, their family was impacted with the Holocaust. And this person then sort of took me in, a young person, and then over the years took over the responsibility of this very iconic American brand. So you have to work with people. So I was working, like for instance, in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, where our factories were, I don't think they'd ever heard a name or met somebody named Farooq. And here I was. Or similarly, we had manufacturing in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. But what I saw was that people were good people. They were respectful. And also they respected me for my work that I did. So I think that, and I also realized right from the beginning, Again, it also goes back to my background in my early childhood, as Stan was saying. Our families got divided. We lived as refugees on a mountain for 10 years. So I knew conflict, knew problems. But I also realized that people respect your getting involved. I have not seen any opposition, any problems throughout my life of getting involved. As I said, for instance, from when I went to the Green Mountains, there were 4,000 people who saw me, that looking at this fellow Farooq. I looked at them, and you have to relate to people. I said, we have something in common where I come from. We say that most of the problems of the world have been created by flatlanders. Do you agree? They say, yeah. But you have to relate to people. And when you do that, you move on.
Stan, let me ask you the same question, and if you can bring it up to date. And that is, do you find that you do have to counsel some of the people you're working with today, that there is some pushback?
Deb, I've never had pushback on this issue. The idea of combating hate is a bipartisan issue. You can be on the left, you can be on the right. I think people understand what hate is. I think people understand what prejudice is. And I don't think anyone in my company, any of my customers, any of my suppliers have ever thought twice and ever thought that this is not a natural thing that we're involved with. And yeah, we may have differences of opinion. We may have different narratives on the world, on our views of religion, but I've never had any pushback. I haven't gotten one email. I don't hide anything. Everything about me is on the internet.
I spent 7 months in Berlin recently, and both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia were on the rise. Talk about this here, but we saw it there. And it seemed to me that there was, if one rises, the other one does too.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if there is a connection between when anti-Semitism rises, so does Islamophobia.
Well, it's obviously there is a connection, and I think that we are looking at many different issues when we're talking of this issue of Islamophobia and also anti-Semitism. We are talking about issues relating to history. We are looking into the history relating to what is happening internationally. Lots of issues. But it's also an important thing is this, that if you spend too much of time thinking of that and talking about it, it creates more problems. We don't talk about it. We are human beings. We respect each other. And when you do that, we have not seen issues of Islamophobia or anti-Semitism with all the groups that we have been dealing with. Because I think that if you make it into an issue, it becomes an issue. We don't make it an issue. We have not seen much of it that I can see.
Let me ask you the same question. It seemed to me that what was happening is hate crimes were rising because anyone who was seen as the other, be it Muslims or Jews, were the other, and the numbers were rising in tandem. And I wondered if you see that here, because we know that there has been a rise in both of those particular kinds of hates. And do you have to address that these two things are somehow paired?
Well, the hate may start in one area, but it never ends over there. It may begin with Jews, it never ends with Jews. It may begin with Muslims, it never ends with Muslims. And yes, I think we have to explain that to people, because at the end of the day, we are not dealing with anti-Semitism, we're not dealing with Islamophobia, we're dealing with hate. People that are insecure in one area, people that have a narrative on a particular historical situation and are using hate to drive their narrative. And I think most people are not interested in hate, but they need to understand where this all begins. And I think that's a little bit of our job, to explain where this all begins and explain that it never ends in the place where it starts. And I think that what we have is some political, geopolitical insecurities, and we have economic insecurities, which are both drivers of hate. And that, I think, is the concern we have now. And we've seen this in other centuries, other times, particularly in the last century, where there's economic insecurity leading to hate. And they go in parallel, whether it starts on this side with Jews or with Muslims, it goes to the other side and it spreads.
And so, Farooq, what is the message that you have found to be successful? What do you say to people? I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, look at this. You know, there's two CEOs, one of them's a Jew, one of them's a Muslim, and boy, are they friends. But it has to go beyond that. And so how do you craft a message to I don't know, can you talk people out of hate? You know, what is it that you say?
You know, it's an interesting question because I'm just trying to think about when was the last time I talked about hate. You know, we sometimes we make these into issues. What we talk about is not hate. We talk about what's in common about us. What do we do to make sure that we respect people? How do we treat people fairly? And I've not spent a lot of time, even though we've been involved with 7 years with the AMJAC. Before that, I've been involved with a lot of different organizations. I think what we talk about is what are the things that unite us, things that make us work together, rather than things that make us hate. We don't talk about it. So it's a question about, I'm just thinking about it. Even in our discussions with 7 years, I don't think we have talked too much about hate. We only talked about the positive things that we should be doing that reflects what we do. And that's why that the issue of hate doesn't, interestingly, with all the discussions, does not come up too much. What comes up is what we've got to do to get the message across about what is common, what we can do to contribute. So I think we have to talk of positive things. When we do that, the issue of hate there is obviously there, but it becomes down at the bottom.
And Stan, do you tailor messages? If you go to a high school, if you go to a college and I mean, there's one thing about you two talking together, of course, but there's another thing when you are with a group and you want to bring these issues up. What do you say?
Well, first of all, I think we focus on domestic matters. We're not going to solve the issues of the world. There are too many. That's too broad an issue, and we are focused on a narrow issue of dealing with hate domestically. It's bipartisan. It's across the spectrum of beliefs, of politics. We have people that have supported legislation in the areas we're interested from both parties. We've had President Trump sign legislation in his first presidency, and we have President Biden signing legislation in his second presidency dealing with the issue of hate, providing data on hate, where crimes are being committed, ensuring that the authorities are aware of these things. I mean, to some extent, the legislation is passed, but it's not fully absorbed yet. And I think this is a bipartisan issue. So our job is to ensure that people understand that hate, yes, you can say stuff, you can use a trope, you can say things that incite hate, but you have to understand where this could go in this country and how we should work together to all understand what it means to say something about another person that the other person may feel very insecure about and not really receive very well. And we need to educate young people and people in general on what it means to be speaking in a way that fuels hate. And that is really the message. It's not about who is right internationally what the view is of one pastor may have said, or one rabbi, or one imam may have said. It's about how do we understand the implications of what's being said, and please understand you're hurting somebody with your words. And that's the message.
So let me ask you both this. We've seen a rise in extremist parties here and certainly in Europe. And so you're up against that, and they have a message that, you know, they don't say the quiet stuff out loud, but you know what their messages are. You're up against an internet that has plenty of hate messages, and young people radicalize themselves online. Certainly during COVID, many did. If you look at the age these days of young terrorists, they're like 18. And that's a bit shocking when you think about it. And so you're up against a really broad messaging system. And how do you counter it?
You know, obviously, all these things you say are there. So we have to say what can we do and what difference can we make. So when we established this MJAC about 8 years back, so we had a discussion. And there were discussions. Some folks wanted to have many different items and agendas. So we said, no, we didn't give it a lot of thought. We said, no, let's keep it very focused. And we said, we're going to focus on two things, which also relates to this issue of hate. We said, we're going to focus on the contributions that American Muslims and American Jews have made here. And second, we will talk about the issue of how we are able to work together. Contributions are important, and we also said another important factor was we'll recognize the contributions that American Jews and American Muslims have made. Now, if we were to just focus a lot on hate and talk about all the negatives and the problems, you'll never get out of it. So we said you have to help shape the debate. So we said we'll also not get involved with international issues. Let's focus on, because everyone has, you've got to make a difference. You can get involved with everything and make no difference. So we said two things, that we will talk about the fact that we should talk about any hate. It's wrong. And second is to recognize the contribution. So you've got to take it to a positive element. And that's what we have been doing. Not been easy. We've had issues where people have come and say, for instance, recently, there's the issues in the Middle East. We had a lot of discussion. Should we be making an issue of what's happening there? Not an easy decision. We said no, because let others talk about it. We said we're going to focus on those two things. Not been easy, but it's been very productive, because we can make a positive difference. But if you only talk of negatives, nothing comes out of it.
So Farooq says that you have to talk about the contributions of Muslims and Jews in America. And it makes me ask this question, which is, do you think that people don't know about that? That's why you do it? It's a piece of education?
I'm not sure if people think about it there, but I mean, I don't think people think about Muslims as contributing. I mean, if you look at the leadership in so many different areas, whether it's in business or in academia, in science, you'll see Muslims and you'll see Jews. But I just don't think people understand that in particular from where I sit, the contributions that Muslims have made to America. And I think it's important that we as Jews find a way to get that message across to the public, and for us to find a way, particularly to people that that are involved in the legislative process, and for people to understand that all Americans contribute, including Muslims and Jews, and to make this a positive message, as Farooq says.
Both of you are involved in international commerce. You have employees who don't live here. And do you ever find that this issue is also a business issue? You are in kind of like an NGO. in a dialogue, but you also are running businesses. And do you have to deal with it in your business as well?
No, are you talking this particular issue of Muslim, Jewish, or are you talking of general hate?
Well, we can talk about Jews and Muslims, but general hate,
Yeah,
offices abroad. Do you have to just make sure that your employees know that it's not tolerated here, or a more positive message, as you say, works better?
it is, of course. We are actually, two of my associates are here. I was always coming here. Ed Harity is in charge of our regional, this whole region, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, of our retail. So I had a conference call of about almost 2 hours with all our leaders, and they were talking about all the contributions that everybody's making. We are not talking about hate, or we are talking about the contributions that our team members are making and the positive things. So it's a question of you got to shape the debate into positive discussions. And after you do that, a lot of the hate stuff doesn't exist. Like, for instance, we have a fairly large operations in Mexico, in Honduras, and they work for us. We are one of the very sort of unique in the fact that 75% of the products is made in our operations, whether United States or other countries. We don't buy them. These are work. Now you've got to create a culture. You've got to create a culture where people take a lot of pride. When you do that, whether we have folks working, as I said, we have 175 design centers in the United States. We have many internationally. You've got to create that culture. When you do that, I have not had any issue where people have talked about hate, because our culture is you got to treat people fairly and with dignity. Whether we are in the middle of Mexico, we're in Honduras, we're all over the place. When you do that, I have never had an issue with people talking about hate, because we are talking about the positives. So that's the job of leadership. Because if I spend too much of time talking on hate, guess what? Yes, you are then creating a debate on that. We are creating a debate on the positives of how you got to bring people together. When you talk of positives, hate gets on the backside.
You too?
Yeah, I don't think there's room in business for hate or for prejudice. Our customers are people from every background, and if an employee makes a statement that impacts a particular sector or religion or race, I think that'll put the business at risk, and such an employee would not make it in the company. So, of course, from a morality point of view, it's important that we don't have any prejudice, but from a pure business point of view, sort of enlightened self-interest, you don't want to be seen taking sides on anything.
Sure. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is this notion that, I mean, Farooq, what you're talking about is you do it by example. You don't have to have lectures about who's a Muslim, who's a Jew, doesn't matter. That there's a way to do this in the business world where it's just somehow known that that behavior won't be tolerated.
Of course, it's in our handbook, employee handbook, but I don't think we ever have to go to that and say, Section 24, you can't hate. I mean, be out of business.
Although in the wider society, that's a little bit harder.
What was that?
In the wider society, that's a little bit harder.
Yeah, but in your own company, and you don't want to, of course, have people not getting along, and one statement could create an issue with a constituency in the business. But with your customers, you want to make sure that you can do business with everybody that's honest.
Talk about two examples. They both involve the governor, and it's the good and the bad that people who are involved in dialogue would have noticed and had to think about. And the first one is the governor, Josh Shapiro, gives $5 million to an Islamic school in Philadelphia. That,
By the way, that's an amazing news. We just heard it a few days back. Congratulations. I mean, you really have done a great job.
yeah, it's an amazing thing.
It is an amazing thing, yeah.
However, on the Jewish holiday, the governor's house is set on fire. And so these are two things that happen almost, back to back in Philadelphia. And what kind of dialogue do you have about that?
Well, first of all, I commend the governor for having done what he's done. I'm assuming he's done his homework, and it's an appropriate organization. And if that's the case, which I'm sure it is, it's a phenomenal thing to do. And I congratulate Majid for sort of playing a key role in making that happen. On the other side, as it relates to the governor's residence, any vandalism of any kind, particularly vandalism that's related to religion or ethnicity or anything like that, is terrible and should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And people should understand the implications of that. And teachers should be talking at schools about that and explaining what it means to write an email on something that results in somebody taking an action, as the alleged person in this case did. So I think there are two separate issues, and I commend the one, and the other one we have to combat through messaging and through education.
Correct. And at the same time, Farooq, there were Muslim groups who stood up and condemned what happened to Josh Shapiro. 25 of them, I believe. And I have seen that again and again when a Jewish cemetery in Philadelphia was vandalized. It was Muslim groups who came and participated in the cleanup. Is there a way, I mean, I see it because I'm a Middle East correspondent and I always notice those things, but do people notice that? Do you think that that message is loud enough so it makes a difference?
Well, messages is never loud enough. We spend a fortune on advertising, but it's not enough. So you got to always recognize that messaging is never enough. It's got to be tremendously elevated. Otherwise, it's not going to be heard, and it's got to be consistent, and the messaging has to be consistent. That's the job of leadership. The job of leadership is to talk about, we're talking about hate crimes. Our job is to say we are against hate crimes. It's got to be make that part of our culture. I'm talking about enterprise. Then you can take it to a larger one. You can take it to the country. The leadership of this country should say we are against anything to do with hate. We say in our enterprise, we're a small enterprise relatively, but we say we are, and you know what? It doesn't even come up because that's our culture. So I think we've got to create a culture in this country where people who talk too much about it should be kept on the sidelines. In our enterprise, nobody talks about it. Not an issue. Because what we have talked about is the positive things. We talk about, if you spend 80% of your time talking of hate and only 20% on positive things, what's going to be heard? 80%. You got to talk of 80% contributions and positive and 20% maybe the other side, then you're going to hear it. The problem is we spend 80% talking about hate and then say, why is people talking about hate? That's all we talk about. Talk about contributions. Talk about, it goes in every element. If you're talking of peace, talk of contributions, talk of positives, then people are going to hear it. If 80% is negative, that's what they're going to hear. And that's what needs to be done.
I want to ask both of you, and I'll start with Stan this time. Is there a time in your coalition, Jewish-Muslim dialogue, that there were disagreements, that people didn't see eye to eye on what it is they were supposed to be doing? And how did you finesse that? How did you bring the group together?
Yeah, of course, there are times with the disagreement, but I would like to emphasize something that hasn't really come up today, that on many issues, I may agree with Farooq, and I may disagree with people that are Jewish. I think it's very dangerous to stereotype all Jews as thinking a certain way, all Muslims thinking in a certain way. I think that's where the beginning and the end of this whole dialogue of trust begins and ends. If we all view the problem as whatever the problem of the day may be, as having to be dealt with through common sense and through trust, you'll find that Jews and Muslims on many issues are in agreement, and there may be Jews and Muslims that will disagree. So the whole idea is to figure out how this trust works, to have discussions, but to avoid being stereotyped.
And over time, that does happen.
Of course. I mean, there's an assumption that every Jew agrees with everything that is being done in Israel. There are Jews that think that every Muslim is a supporter of terrorism, and these are dangerous assumptions. Farooq and I have the same values. Our values, you couldn't see daylight. And of course, Farooq has his personal views, and I have my personal views. I believe there should be a state of Israel, but I don't agree with every issue, with every way in which every particular action is handled. That's not so. Don't think of Jews as thinking in a or don't stereotype Jews as thinking in a certain way, and don't think of Muslims as thinking a certain way. Think of Muslims as Jews that are involved in this kind of work as having common sense and values.
You agree?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when we were establishing the MJAC, the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, we had a lot of people who wanted an agenda to be fairly large because they said we're going to talk about all kinds of things. So we had a lot of discussions. And wisely, we then decided with a lot of discussion input that we'll only focus on two things, which is, first one was recognizing the contributions of Americans or Muslims and Jews, and then fight against hate crimes. We said in the United States, because if we start thinking, for our organization, it's a small one, if we had tried to solve the problems of the world and all the issues that the Jewish people and the Muslims are facing, well, the fact is there'll be fights. So we had a big challenge. You asked this question, well, the difference is yes. One of the big one was 15 months or so back when there was this issue of the problems in the Gaza and the Palestinian areas. So the question was, what should we do? There's a big issue, but not an easy decision. So we said and the discussion was, we should expand and talk about all those things. We said no, not an easy thing. We even said for the time being, officially, we'll take a little break because there was so much of going on. So you have to really think about when is the time to take a break, and then what should the priorities be. If you're trying to solve everything, you can't. So we decided we'll focus on those. Not easy, because everybody wanted us to do all kinds of stuff. But we said no. And what happens is when you do that, at least you're able to maintain the organization. If you had tried to solve all the problems, MJAC would not exist today.
So it's not a matter of only solving problems, but as you know, we all do, that universities erupted over what was happening in Gaza. And you can choose not to talk about it, but it's there. And I wondered if it made your job more difficult, that the temperatures were high. They still are. And you had to, you can say, let's not talk about it, but you had to recognize that the temperature was high.
No, absolutely. It was a very difficult decision. It was not an easy one. We almost were at the break-even point, break up. There were so many differences because some of our members, especially who have close associations with that area, they were very upset. So we had to decide what should we do. The option was give it up, fight, or continue it with an area with an agenda that we could maintain it. So we had to make a decision. We said we're going to maintain it, not be all over the place, and really still focus on the problems and the hate crimes and the differences or issues in the United States. If we try to solve, not an easy decision, if we try to solve the issues or try to focus on what's happening in the Middle East or in other parts of the world, the chances are, we won't make a difference. So it took a discipline, and everybody agreed with it, that we'll still focus on, first only in the United States, and we said, again, we're talking about our organization, small one, that we will focus on the hate crimes here and the contributions of Muslims and Jews, and that kept us going. If we had not done it, MJAC would not exist.
And is that still true today?
Yes.
But it was a tough time.
It was a very tough time. In fact, we had to make some decision on midnight with our discussions with Ari and, all the folks were there, Natalia. And when we said, it was a tough decision, so, Stanley and I had to make a decision to tell all our members that, we want to continue it, but we'll focus on those two things, nothing else. Not an easy thing. Some people said, no, we don't agree. In fact, they left our organization, which is okay. But if, for instance, we try to solve everybody's problem, there'll be no organization.
Well, you're not going to solve the Middle East, so that was probably a wise decision.
Exactly, yeah.
Stan, did you also feel that it was rough going because of what was happening in Gaza?
Of course, it was rough going because of what was occurring in Gaza. I have my personal views of what happened there, and I'm not very happy about them, very sad about what happened, of course. You know, I think, I speak about myself, and I'm pretty sure Farooq would agree, we, of course, 100% support freedom of speech. People can say what they want, so long as it doesn't result in violence. And so, and, you know, who says this resulted in violence and didn't? That's not for us to make the decision. There are others, courts can handle that, and university presidents can handle that, but we're proponents of free speech. Say what you want, so long as it doesn't result in any harm to others. And I think that was the backdrop against which we had to operate. And we did not take positions on Gaza on October 7th, but we were proponents of people having the ability to say things that were on their minds.
Did you lose members?
When you say members, we're not a formal organization with membership. We're a coalition of people that come and discuss these issues. We advocate together with meeting elected officials in Washington, local state officials. And some people didn't come to these meetings, others did. And there was a request by most to please keep these meetings quiet for the moment. So we didn't announce. We were in Washington the other day, a few weeks ago. We didn't issue a press release. No need to do that. But we met with people on both sides of the aisle, and I believe impressed on both sides of the aisle, on the leadership at the highest level, the importance of combating hate. And we have legislation that we're going to support, and we believe it'll be signed by this president.
And what is that legislation?
It's about collecting data. It's about finding ways to prosecute hate crimes. And I think the legislation is being supported by both sides of the aisle.
Is that a goal for you too, that you need mechanisms? It's not just about dialogue, but you actually need things that you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was interesting that in the first Trump administration, their administration was, we were involved with them, and it was the administration and the legislature passed the first hate crime bill in the legislature. That was an amazing thing that happened. That is hate against hate crime. There was no bills that hate is bad. Legislature was passed at that time by the Congress and signed by the president. I don't know if what will they do now, but 8 years back they did that. So we all believed in it. It's tremendously important to get the message across. As Stan mentioned, was a couple of weeks back, we were at a house. We met many members of Congress on both sides. And first of all, we got to help shape the debate. The fact that MJAC was there, they were a bit surprised that we are still there.
I bet.
They were surprised. And we said, we are very much interested in the issues of combating hate, and we want to make sure that people work together. We met some senators, members of Congress, and it's a tough time to be in Washington. They're so distracted. But it's important for us to be there and get the message across.
I was surprised today to learn that Pennsylvania doesn't have a hate crime legislation. Is your work also here?
I don't know the specifics of Pennsylvania, but I think others do. But I'm pretty sure that Pennsylvania does collect data on hate crimes. Our concern is not with Pennsylvania. There are other states where hate crimes don't exist because there's no collecting of data. That's our concern. I believe the FBI and other agencies are interested in collecting this data, and Congress is interested in giving them the tools. Again, this is not a political one side versus the other, and it doesn't only impact Jews and Muslims. A lot of this legislation started during the hate crime period, or the hatred against was crimes against Asian Americans. And there's been some significant speakers that spoke out on both sides of the aisle on this issue. So it's about very often just collecting the data.
I have two more questions, so I want to urge all of you to write yours and put them at the end of the aisle. And first of my last two is this. The Trump administration has focused a lot on anti-Semitism, in particular in its push against elite universities and the demonstrations that happened here. That's an issue of free speech, and people would argue that it is. Are you for such a focus on anti-Semitism? Do you think it gets in the way?
I'm a business person. If you ask me about anti-Semitism in the workforce, I will give you an answer. But anti-Semitism or Islamophobia at a university, I will leave it. There's a vice provost here somewhere, and there's a provost, and there's a
Fair enough.
president, and I want to keep my involvement with Penn and my dean of the dental school. So
I just wondered, Majid, if you have any opinions on this push to so-called curb anti-Semitism on university campuses. The administration has made a huge push to do that.
Well, obviously, any hate is wrong. So obviously, everybody, we have to. But the question becomes, in my view, my personal view is, it should not be only focused on anti-Semitism. It should also focus on hate against anybody, including Muslims. That I don't hear.
I think we agree.
That's very interesting.
Right. Of course, it's logical.
Yes, because we've already determined that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism get paired.
All hate is bad.
Yeah. These sort of dialogues that you two have, and you've done it now for quite some time, is in some ways considered a very liberal idea. And I wondered if you thought that in this climate where conservatism is the norm now, does that in any way affect how people see this dialogue, how effective this dialogue is in the current climate?
I don't believe this is a left or right-wing issue. I believe there are plenty conservative thinking churches, other religious institutions that have exactly the same issues that Farooq and I have. So this is across the spectrum of conservatism, liberalism. I don't think it's prejudice is prejudice against minorities.
You know, it's an important issue. I've had an opportunity of, at one time, years back, being involved with this, helping establishing a Muslim center in Westchester County where we live, a mosque. I've been involved with helping, when we needed to, a number of Muslim organizations around the country. I have not had, and I know a lot of those folks, many of them who run these, I have not had anybody say what we are doing is wrong. No. Even those you might consider somewhat more radical. I'm talking on the Muslim side. I don't know about the Jewish side. None, they may not come and say, okay, we want to participate with you, we want to be part of it, but none of them say, is it wrong? Don't do it. If anything, quietly say, pretty good you're doing it. It's you, not us. Okay, so we understand that. But I think that it's interesting. You would think that people would criticize this organization, perhaps criticize me, to say, why are you doing this? Why are you working with these Jewish organizations? Why are you working with AJC? Now, AJC has a, tremendously important organization, very strong, big, but they also have, people have different perspectives about them, which we know. But you know what? Nobody has come because we've always said, the reason I like AJC is because they help us get the message across. They're strong, they're powerful. I said, why should we get a weak organization to do it? That's what I've told the Muslims. So let's use them. Their strength, their power. then you know what? They understand it.
I am going to ask one more question, and it's about Stan saying it doesn't matter conservative or liberal. In the conservative world, we have Muslim bans. We have rules that say, I'm sorry, you can't come here because you're a Muslim. I mean, it's not framed that way in the executive order, but essentially that's what it means.
That's a very different issue to hate. I don't know about the particular legislation you're referring to.
They become executive orders.
Yes, but I haven't studied that. I'm sure there are people here that have studied that. But I will tell you, I think even way before Farooq and I founded MJAC, I thought it was important to spend time in Utah with the LDS because they are experiencing the same issues that Jews and Muslims are experiencing. And when I was president of AJC, within the first 3 or 4 months, I asked for 2 visits, one to the Pope, as I mentioned, and the other one to the elders in Utah, because we're in the same boat. It begins with one, it never ends with that one. So I think, yeah, there may be particular legislation. I don't know what your executive orders, but at the end of the day, hate is hate is hate. I know what hate is. My parents came from Germany. I grew up in South Africa. I know what hate is. I can see it.
Farooq?
What's the question? I'm sorry.
Ban. How do you deal with that?
The Muslim ban?
Yes, that certain Muslim countries are banned from coming to the United States. They were in the first administration. It took them 3 times to get the legislation right so they could do it, and they've brought it back.
I think it's wrong. I think you can curtail individuals coming in, but to put bans on all the people, I think is wrong. It's not good for America. I think, yes, I don't agree with the policies of some of these so-called Muslim countries and their leadership and what they do. It's wrong. Yes, I think stop those so-called leaders and dictators coming here, but not the common people. That I think is wrong.
Okay, I will leave it at that. It is part of it. I'm just assuming it must be part of your dialogue when these things happen.
MJAC's not about foreign policy matters. I'm sure there are many things that, as it relates to Israel, Pakistan, India, that Farooq and I would agree on much more than I would agree with many Jews, or he would agree with many Muslims. I mean, it's common sense is common sense.
All right, I'm going to open this up to other questions. Majid, that was the only one. Come on.
Oh, I got another one in the back there. I got to get this thing debated. Get the blood going.
Oh, good. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, what do you think is the biggest roadblock to Muslim-Jewish brother sisterhood in the U.S.? What's the biggest roadblock?
Go ahead.
Gives him time to think.
I'm good at delegation, you know.
I have not found a roadblock speaking to Muslims individually. I've not found a roadblock to dialogue with Muslims speaking to Jews individually. The problem is when people get together in organizations, that's where the problem emerges. But I work in the workplace with Muslims. I would say one of the most trusted board members on my company is a Muslim. Marion's partner, medical partner in a practice for 25 years, comes from the same part of the Indian subcontinent as Farooq, a Muslim. I find I've yet to have a dialogue with any Muslim that will not listen. We may and want to dialogue. We may have disagreements on the Israel narrative or the American narrative, but people will talk. But when people get together in groups, Jewish or non-Jewish, it's dangerous. That's where the problem starts.
Big groups, that's sort of the big headline here. Farooq?
Well, you know, there are vested interests everywhere. And that goes in politics, that goes in religions, that goes in everything. So there are folks who have made religion into their politics and vested interests. For many folk, talking of hate against somebody else elevates them. So I think it's wrong, and I think that our message has always been work together. Yeah, we know. It doesn't mean that we agree. We don't agree on everything. But I think it's important to talk and to discuss and to be on the table. So we always said being on the table is more important than being off it.
Okay, now I have a business question. And the business question is this. Last year, certain business leaders publicly stated that they would not hire students who speak up in support of one side or another in the Israel-Palestine conflict. It seems like this has created a culture of fear and silence among students who want to secure jobs. What's your stance on this?
I think it's wrong. We don't even think of this. What you just said. We don't, as a policy, it'd be wrong. Any discrimination is wrong, illegal. As far as I'm using the word illegal from my perspective. Discrimination is wrong based on we treat people based on the fact, are they qualified? If they're qualified, they're acceptable. I think that should be the only qualification. Anything else is wrong, and I think it should be condemned.
Stan?
So we don't have a question on our employee recruiting forms. What is your view on any particular topic? What we will do is we find out about somebody making a hateful statement or somebody sending an email that spreads hate. That person doesn't belong in our company because that person is not going to be a person that's going to be a good team member, and our customers won't appreciate it. So having particular views is really not an issue at all.
But let me come back to something you said, Farooq. These things happened. That was clear. It did happen, where students were targeted if they demonstrated, and there were companies who said they wouldn't hire them. Was there enough, and I'll ask both of you, was there enough pushback from business leaders to say, this is really wrong, you shouldn't be? I didn't see any.
No, I agree. I think that there should be more of that. But I think that, businesses don't want to get involved in these kinds of conflicts because it creates all kinds of issues. So I think people leave these out, even though they may. I mean, it has never come to us. This question has not come to us or to me. There's no such thing. And we have people working for us all over and all kinds of people. But it never has come up. So I think that we have to treat people with fairly. We have to make sure that we make those decisions not based on religion, on people's view. Now, if they are hurtful, if they harm others, then you've got to take action. That's the only time that you've got to take action.
And back to you, Stan, because you're very clear on.
Agree.
Agree.
People can have whatever views they want, so long as they don't spread hate. This is all about hate. That's it. Don't want to see it.
Okay, that's a great place to stop. I want to thank both of you for being here, and also the audience for listening to us. And I think that we kind of nailed it.
Yeah.